All right, so now that steps 1, 2, and 3 are completed, it's time to finally start with step number 4, which is going to be the actual design and development phase. And so in this lecture, we are going to do some quick setup in order to be able to start working on the actual website very soon. So back in VS Code, as always, we need to start by creating our files. So index.html, and for some reason it created it inside of the index folder, but we want it outside. Okay, so if we now close this, then the index.html is clearly outside. And then we also want style.css. And for some reason it keeps creating them inside, but we can easily fix that, right? Now here we will once again scaffold or HTML, but of course if you want to practice a little bit more, you can also write it by hand, but I will just use exclamation mark and then enter like this. And then starting with the title here, OmniFood. For now, a little bit later we might add something there, but for now let's call it just OmniFood. And then I also want to connect the style.css file. So remember that is link. Then here we need to specify this rel property, set it to style sheet, and then the actual path. So that's the href. And actually I want to put this style here in a separate CSS folder this time. So we're going to have multiple CSS files and multiple image files. And so I want to create a folder for each of them. Okay, so actually let's take everything out of the content folder and then delete it, because here we already have the image folder that we will want to be using. So let's take that out, and why not the content as well? And then this folder is empty, and so we no longer need that actually. All right, so we have our image folder as we always had. And then let's create a new folder here called CSS. And later we will then also have another folder for JavaScript, but that will be a lot later. Okay, but anyway, now here we need to specify the path to that file as always. And so that is at css-style.css. Right, give it a first save, and that then formats the HTML here as always. And then here, let's just add the h1 element. And here we can immediately grab the content from here. Why not? So the headline of OmniFood is this one. So let's actually use that right away. So, okay. And so for now, that's actually enough for the HTML. Let's just make sure that it works by going live right away. Now that opened it in a wrong browser for me, but I can also manually do it. So 127.0.0.1, and then it is port 5500, I think. And so here we go. So that is our HTML right there. And now let's go actually to our CSS. And here, as always, I'm going to start with the global reset. So selecting everything and then setting padding and margin to 0 in order to override the default styles of all browsers. And then also activating the border box setting in our box model. Okay. So that is our global reset as always. And just to see if the CSS is correctly connected, now all the paddings and margins should be gone here. And indeed they are. And so now let's also start adding some simple styles to the body. And I will start by setting the font family simply to sans serif. That's because for now, I don't want to choose any specific typeface yet. I think it's best that we first build a little bit of the page at least before we can figure out which typeface is the best fit for our design and for our website personality. Then here I also like to reset the line height on the entire page to 1 and set the font weight to 400. And finally, let's set a text color to 555. So this is a gray color that I like to use a lot. So basically one of those colors which have only 3 numbers. So like 333 or 555, which is, remember, the same as this, right? So I find these quite easy to work with. And so usually I reach for one of them as my base gray color. Okay, let's just check it out here. And indeed, our CSS is already working. And so this is basically our initial CSS setup here in the code. So as I said, that's the code. And now let's think a little bit about the design. So basically taking our very first design decisions here and setting up some small design systems as well. So here I will add a big comment block, and then in there I will basically write all the design settings that we want for our overall design here. And let's start with the typography. So typography system. Now here I want to use those font sizes that we have been using in the previous section as well. So let's actually open one of the files from that. So just to copy that. So it is on my desktop, then here in components. And then let's just get the very first one. And so here we have these two systems. So just copy them and paste them here. Spacing, that's for later. So this is for the font sizes in pixels. Okay, but then the spacing system comes a bit later. Because for typography, we can actually define some more, basically defaults here. So we can also specify default font weights and also default line heights. So not really defaults, but more of commonly used settings that we use. So I like to do this here, so specifying kind of a design system so that then whenever I need something, I just have to go here to the top of my CSS file and then reach it from there. And so that will help us a lot in maintaining a consistent design across the entire page. So for example, I can say that the default line height is 1, which is what we set here. And then as we keep growing the page, we will then keep adding more and more here. Okay, let's remove that, just add a dash here, just to make it a bit more visible. And of course here too. Okay. So typography is our first design ingredient. Remember that? And so let's now go through all of them here. So the second one, remember, is colors. And we already have our primary color. So that's here in the content, right? Okay. And then remember, we also need to generate some tints and some shades. And we might also need some accent colors. So again, all of that can be found in the web design lecture on colors. So tints, which is basically darker versions, and shades, which are lighter versions, or maybe it's the other way around, I never know. Then we will also at some point define some accents and of course, or grays. And the grays we already have, at least one of them. So this 555, but over time we will keep adding more of them. So let's just add some dash here again. Okay, and again we will add these here over time. So I'm not yet going to generate all the possible tints that I might need and all the possible shades, because, well, I might not need them then, and so I will simply generate them as we go. Okay, so just in order to save some time, and the same, of course, about the accents and the gray colors. The next design ingredient is images, but for that we cannot really set up any system. So there's no values to define for images. However, I can show you where I actually got all of these images here. So remember, there's all of these different images. So like these customers, these ones here in the gallery, and well, really a ton of images. And of course, I needed to get them from somewhere. And my main source that I already mentioned also before is unsplash.com. And as always, the link is on my resources page. And so then it's, of course, very easy. All you have to do is, for example, to search for food, right? And then whatever you need, you can just click here on this download arrow. And this will then immediately download the image. And you can then use it for free without any restrictions wherever you want. So I think this one here is actually on the gallery or something. And you will see many of these images here actually on our web page. Well, restaurant does not really exist. But again, there is really a ton of high quality images that are really, really nice. So this one here, remember, was actually the background image for the header that we built in the last section. And it is also very important in this project because here we have this hero image that I created. So it's made out of these 3 images. And one of them is, again, this beautiful image here of this women eating some food. Okay, and so yeah, this is how I got these images. Then as for the customers, there is a very nice page or website which is called UI Faces. So this one here, and here you can download all of these faces basically completely for free, and just as the images from Unsplash, you can just use them wherever you want and free of charge, of course. So that's where I got those, and I think that's it. These other ones, so these app screens here, I actually designed them completely on my own, basically based on the design of our site here. Next up, there would be icons, but again, there's not really anything to specify there. So let's go to the next one, which is shadows. So here we might at some point define some rules for shadows, or basically some standard that we want to repeat over and over again, because just with all the other design ingredients, it looks a lot better if we stay consistent throughout the design and don't use, for example, 2 very similar shadows, but which are not exactly the same. So for now, there's nothing here, but a bit later there might. Then the same for border radius, which is the next ingredient. So here we will also a little bit later specify something. And finally, or last design ingredient that matters here is white space. And so here we now have this spacing system. So that system that we are going to use. And well, I guess that's actually it. So that's the only thing we can specify here for white space. And so I think that's it for now. And again, we will keep filling this up as we go. Now here we can actually also say that the default that we already set before is 400. And then we will, again, keep adding more. All right, very nice. So with this, we have basically everything in place to finally start coding and start building this project. Now, just one more thing that we need to learn about before is a little bit about responsive design. That's because the responsive web design principles need to be applied from the very, very beginning of a project. And up until this point, we never cared about this, but now we are building a real world project. And so then, of course, we need to make it responsive from the very beginning, make it adapt to all screen sizes. And so therefore, let's now quickly learn the basics of responsive web design.